Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling a little too exposed, like you handed someone the script to your entire life, fears, goals, failures, and all only to wonder later, did I say too much? You're not alone. But the real question is, why do we feel so compelled to tell everything? What are we hoping to gain? Validation, closeness, relief? Let's pause here, because here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Oversharing strips away your power. It sounds harsh, but it's real. When you reveal too much, too soon, especially to people who haven't earned your trust, you disarm your psychological edge. You hand over information that could be used not only to judge you, but potentially to manipulate or define you in ways you never intended. What you think builds connection might actually be building walls between you and your goals. There's power in being known, yes, but even greater power in being strategically unknown. The brain, neurologically, is wired to be intrigued by mystery. When people can't fully figure you out, they become more attentive, more respectful, even more considerate of your boundaries. Think about the people who command the most respect. They aren't loud. They aren't constantly explaining themselves. They move with intention, speak with precision, and leave others wondering, not assuming. And that curiosity, it earns more attention than a full-blown life story ever could. And here's another truth. Emotional exposure isn't the same as emotional connection. Sometimes we confuse vulnerability with bonding. We spill our secrets, expecting others to hold them gently, but not everyone will. Not everyone is safe. Not everyone has earned the right to sit with your truth. And when you give too much of yourself to someone who hasn't proven their loyalty, you're not being brave, you're being unprotected. Your story is sacred. The things you've been through, the lessons you've learned, the dreams you hold close, they are not casual details to be dropped into any conversation. They're not tools for validation. They are gifts, and not everyone is worthy of receiving them. Protecting your story isn't selfish, it's smart. It's about understanding that emotional boundaries are a form of self-respect. Silence doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you're practicing emotional discipline. It means you know the difference between transparency and wisdom, between being seen and being safe. You don't have to fill every quiet moment with facts about your life. You don't owe anyone your inner world just to keep the peace, just to avoid awkwardness, or just to feel understood. If understanding you requires oversharing, then maybe that person isn't really seeing you at all. Your privacy is your power. What people don't know, they can't control. What they can't predict, they can't undermine. And what they can't define, they respect. So, the next time you feel tempted to lay it all out, ask yourself, who is this for? Have they earned it? And what am I giving away by sharing this part of me? Because once something is said, it can't be unsaid, and not every listener is meant to hear you at your most real. Protect your peace, guard your narrative, and remember, the strongest people don't shout their truth, they live it quietly, with confidence and restraint. There's a certain illusion in the modern age that talking more somehow makes us more relatable, more real, even more trustworthy. We've been conditioned to believe that vulnerability equals strength, and in the right context with safe, emotionally intelligent people, it absolutely can be. But when vulnerability is handed out recklessly, without discernment, it doesn't connect, it exposes, and that exposure doesn't empower you. It strips you of a powerful advantage you didn't even realize you were giving away, your psychological edge. Your psychological edge is that space of mystery, that quiet confidence, that restraint that keeps others slightly unsure, respectfully curious, and mentally engaged. When you reveal everything, your history, your insecurities, your long-term plans, your traumas without truly knowing who you're speaking to, you lose that edge. You give people a map of your inner workings, what drives you, what triggers you, what you fear, what you love most. And once someone has that map, they have access. Whether they use it consciously or not, they now know how to influence your emotions, steer your expectations, or manipulate your decisions. What felt like bonding can quickly become unbalanced power dynamics. Oversharing isn't just about saying too much, it's about giving away emotional leverage without ensuring there's trust to support it. People don't need to know your full story in order to respect you. In fact, the less they know, the more intentional and focused their perception of you becomes. They judge you by your actions, not your admissions. The moment you overexpose your thoughts, your strategies, or your personal truths, you become more predictable. And in the space of predictability, people stop listening with curiosity, they start reacting with assumptions. Think about environments where competition or comparison is subtly present: the workplace, social circles, even early stages of dating. When you overshare in these spaces, you provide ammunition. That one thing you casually mentioned in confidence could be used as a point of gossip, criticism, or even leverage later on. Oversharing doesn't guarantee connection. It often invites projection. People don't just hear your words, they filter them through their own biases, insecurities, and intentions. And once your information is in their hands, it's no longer in your control. Moreover, when you overshare, you're often doing it from a place of emotional urgency, the need to be understood, accepted, or validated. But genuine confidence doesn't need constant explanation. It doesn't need to overexpress or over-identify. It knows that restraint is strength, that listening more than you speak allows you to observe, assess, and protect your emotional space. When you choose not to reveal everything, you create a boundary that silently demands respect. You show that your value isn't tied to how open you are, but to how grounded you remain regardless of how much others know about you. Oversharing can also erode the very connection you seek. Instead of building trust slowly, you fast forward intimacy and overwhelm the other person, creating an imbalance they didn't ask for. In romantic dynamics, this often leads to emotional burnout or distance. In friendships, it can result in one-sidedness. In professional relationships, it can lower your credibility, especially if your disclosures are personal in nature and delivered without context. The need to be transparent can become a compulsion to be seen, but being seen too soon, too fully, can leave you feeling emotionally naked and misunderstood. Your psychological edge isn't about secrecy, it's about wisdom. It's about understanding that real influence comes from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. When you speak, every word should carry weight because it was chosen, not spilled. Your story is not less valuable because it's protected, it's more powerful because it's sacred. People don't need the whole book to respect the author. They just need to feel the depth in the silence between the lines. And that depth is only possible when you resist the urge to overshare and instead choose to hold space for what truly matters. There's something undeniably magnetic about mystery. It draws people in, not because it hides who you are, but because it invites curiosity about who you might be. When others can't immediately categorize you, when you don't rush to explain every thought, emotion, or motive, you create an unspoken invitation for respect. In a world where everyone is oversharing, the person who withholds, who chooses their words with care, who reveals themselves slowly and deliberately, that person instantly stands out, not by being loud, but by being unreadable. And that unreadability doesn't confuse people, it intrigues them. People naturally respect what they don't fully understand. Mystery commands attention because it signals confidence. It implies that you have something valuable, something whole, something self-contained. And more importantly, it sends the message, not everyone gets access. That restraint tells the world that you don't need external validation to feel seen because you've already seen yourself. There's no desperation in mystery, only strength. The less you explain, the more others lean in to try and understand, and that effort they put in, that's where respect begins to grow. But when you overshare too quickly, or when you reveal every layer without hesitation, something subtly damaging can happen. The illusion of specialness begins to dissolve. People begin to feel like they've figured you out. What was once intriguing becomes routine. What was once attractive becomes expected. It's not that they stop caring, it's that they stop wondering. And without wonder, respect often follows the path of least resistance toward dismissal. Familiarity isn't inherently bad. Deep connection does require a degree of openness, of course, but the issue arises when familiarity is given, not earned, when someone has access to all of your stories, fears, habits, routines, and reactions too soon. They may begin to subconsciously take your presence for granted. The human mind is wired to adapt. What's consistent becomes background noise. And when you make every corner of your identity available without boundaries, you risk becoming that background. The intrigue fades. The reverence dulls. The space for imagination and curiosity that once made you magnetic is replaced by predictability. It's why people often feel more valued at the beginning of relationships, before too much has been said, before too much routine has set in. That early phase where both people are still discovering, still wondering, still decoding is powerful. But when one person tries to fast track closeness by laying all their emotional cards on the table, it can actually backfire. Intimacy isn't built by revealing everything too quickly. It's built by earning each piece of someone one layer at a time through trust, patience, and mutual curiosity. In friendships, too, when you constantly make yourself emotionally available without limits, when you answer every question, fill every silence, explain every reaction, people may unconsciously begin to devalue your presence. Not because you're not worthy, but because the effort they once put into knowing you is no longer required. It's all just there, and what requires no effort over time often receives no care. Mystery, then, isn't about being cold or detached. It's not about withholding love, affection, or truth. It's about pacing. It's about discernment. It's about showing up fully, but not emptying your soul into every space that feels warm. It's about giving people something to earn, something to respect, something to wonder about. Because when someone has to lean in a little closer to truly understand you, when they have to pay attention, listen deeply, and observe over time, their appreciation grows. Their respect deepens, and their desire to stay connected becomes rooted not in familiarity, but in fascination. There's a dangerously common misconception that the more you reveal, the closer you'll feel. That if you open your heart wide enough, fast enough, someone will step in and meet you with equal depth, equal truth, equal care. But what we don't often realize is that emotional exposure isn't intimacy, not when it's unreciprocated, unprotected, or unearned. It's simply putting your soul on display in a world where not everyone has the intention or the capacity to hold it with care. True intimacy is mutual, it's earned over time, it's built layer by layer, with both people gradually opening up in a dance of safety and trust. But emotional exposure, that's often impulsive, it's reactive. It usually comes from a deep internal need to feel seen, validated, or accepted, and when that need drives us to overshare, especially early in any relationship, what we create isn't closeness, it's risk without a net. It's walking emotionally naked into a space we haven't had the time to assess, and once you're exposed, you can't take those parts of yourself back. We tend to confuse openness with authenticity, but authenticity isn't about telling everyone everything. It's about being real with discernment. It's about knowing when to speak, what to say, and to whom it should be said. Emotional exposure is indiscriminate. It lays everything out. It says, "Here I am, unfiltered," without pausing to ask, is this person emotionally mature enough to receive this? That's not vulnerability, that's self-neglect dressed up as bravery. When you expose your inner world too quickly, your traumas, your hopes, your deepest fears without first establishing emotional safety, what you're doing is handing over powerful, sensitive parts of yourself without knowing if they'll be honored. And when they're not, when they're dismissed, mocked, misunderstood, or worse, weaponized, the hurt that follows isn't just about rejection, it's about betrayal, not by the other person, but by your own instinct to protect your emotional boundaries. Emotional intimacy requires trust, and trust is a currency that should be exchanged slowly. When you give someone full access to your emotional landscape before they've proven their loyalty or emotional intelligence, you blur the lines between being genuine and being emotionally reckless. And ironically, the very thing you hoped to create a deep bond is undermined by the speed and intensity with which you tried to force it. Some people are drawn to emotional intensity because it gives the illusion of connection. It feels dramatic, profound, consuming, but intensity isn't the same as intimacy. Intimacy grows in the quiet moments, the consistent presence, the mutual respect. It deepens through boundaries, not boundarylessness. When someone shows up repeatedly, listens without judgment, proves over time that your emotions are safe with them, that's when you've earned the right to open up more, not before. Without emotional safety, exposure becomes a liability. It can make you feel misunderstood, depleted, even ashamed of having shared so much with someone who didn't deserve it. And then you question yourself, not just your choice of words, but your worth. You begin to wonder if you're too much, when in reality, you just gave too much to someone who didn't know how to receive it. Intimacy is not a confession booth. It's not a race to see who can reveal their wounds the fastest. It's a shared space built on emotional reciprocity, not one-sided downloads. When you feel the urge to spill your entire heart just to feel closer to someone, pause, ask yourself, is this emotional courage or is this emotional gambling? Because your story, your truth, your pain, those are sacred, and they should only be shared where safety, care, and depth are not just possible but proven. There is a quiet power in recognizing that your story, everything you've lived, survived, overcome, and grown through is not for public consumption. It's not content. It's not entertainment. It's sacred. The moments that shaped you, broke you, healed you, and rebuilt you, they hold weight, depth, and a kind of spiritual currency that should never be handed out freely. Not because you're hiding, but because you're honoring the road that brought you here. Too often, we fall into the trap of believing that sharing everything is what creates closeness, that by spilling our hearts, we'll somehow accelerate connection or validate our worth. But there is a difference between being open and being available to emotional extraction. Just because someone asks, listens, or seems interested, doesn't mean they've earned the right to know the chapters of you that still ache when you read them. Your story contains pieces of your past self, the one who didn't yet know how to say no, the one who tolerated pain in silence, the one who learned the hardest lessons in the loneliest hours. Those parts deserve to be shared only with people who can hold them gently, who won't reduce them to anecdotes or use them as leverage. Protecting your story isn't about secrecy, it's about self-respect. It's about filtering access not from fear, but from discernment. When you start viewing your life's experiences as something precious not to be hidden, but to be held with care, you change the way you relate to others. You stop offering vulnerability as a bargaining chip. You stop leading with your wounds to prove you're real. Instead, you lead with presence, with strength, with clarity about who truly deserves to sit at the table of your truth. Silence is so often misunderstood. People see it and assume weakness, withdrawal, or avoidance. But real silence, the kind you choose, not the kind forced on you, is a form of strength. It's not about running away from confrontation, nor is it about emotional suppression. It's about being deeply aware of what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's knowing that not every opinion deserves a response, not every provocation deserves your reaction, and not every moment of discomfort needs to be filled with words just to prove you care. Emotional discipline is the art of restraint. It's the ability to feel something intensely and still not act on impulse. It's resisting the urge to overshare, to over-explain, to beg for clarity or closure when someone has already shown they're unwilling or incapable of giving it. Silence in this context becomes your armor. It becomes your way of saying, I no longer hand over my peace so easily. There's a certain power in watching a storm rise within you and choosing to meet it with calm. In that silence, you learn to regulate rather than react. You create space between what triggers you and how you respond, and in that space, self-mastery is born. Emotional discipline doesn't silence your truth, it sharpens it. It teaches you that timing is everything, that some battles aren't yours to fight, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. People often equate silence with emotional coldness, but real silence comes from a place of intense self-respect. It's not shutting down, it's leveling up. It's understanding that constant expression isn't the only path to connection or resolution. Sometimes the most profound message you can send is through your refusal to engage in chaos or confusion. You stop needing to be understood by those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining yourself to people who only listen to reply, not to understand. You stop handing out your emotional availability to those who haven't earned it. Silence gives you time to listen not just to others, but to yourself, to hear your instincts before they're drowned out by noise, to check in with your own needs before meeting someone else's expectations. In silence, you begin to see people more clearly. You notice the patterns. You feel the misalignments. You stop making excuses for behavior that never deserved your tolerance in the first place. You let go of the need to fix, to prove, to convince. You just observe, and in that observation, you reclaim your clarity. Silence is presence, it's poise. It's choosing not to dilute your value by trying to be constantly visible. It's giving your thoughts time to ripen before you release them into the world. It's choosing yourself again and again in a world that pressures you to speak just to stay relevant. It's not about disappearing, it's about elevating. In a world that constantly demands our voices, our stories, and our emotional availability, choosing silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Each moment of restraint, each pause before reaction, each decision to protect your story rather than spill it, reflects a higher level of emotional maturity. You're not hiding, you're honoring your journey. You're not closed off, you're discerning. True strength doesn't always speak the loudest. Sometimes it whispers through stillness, through boundaries, through the quiet confidence of self-possession. Your silence can be a boundary, a message, and a declaration all in one. And when you begin to understand that not every space deserves your energy, not every person deserves access to your truth, and not every situation warrants a response, you begin to move with a power that's deeply rooted, unshakable, and calm. That's not detachment, that's emotional clarity, and that clarity is everything.